You know, in pregnancy care, there are few things that get watched more closely than a baby's growth. But what happens when that growth seems to slow down or even stop? Today, we're going to take a journey through the really high stakes world of managing a baby that isn't growing quite as expected. And let's be clear, the stakes are incredibly high. This number, 30%, it's a tough one to see. It represents the tragic fact that impaired fetal growth is linked to almost a third of all stillbirths that happen before labor begins. So, understanding this isn't just academic, it's absolutely vital.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to follow the clinical journey right from the start. First, why does this matter so much? Then, the huge difference between a baby that's small versus one that's growth restricted. We'll look at how we predict and even prevent these issues, how we diagnose them, and then the critical part, monitoring and timing the delivery. And finally, we'll see what happens after the baby is born.
All right, let's dive right in with the big question. Why is fetal growth such a massive deal? I mean, it's really the foundation for everything else we're going to talk about. You see, the risks here go way beyond just being a small baby at birth. Of course, there's the immediate, terrifying danger of stillbirth and neonatal mortality. And in the short term, these little ones can struggle with things like low blood sugar or staying warm. But the effects can cast a really long shadow. We're talking about higher risks for neurodevelopmental disorders and even adult diseases down the line, things like obesity, high blood pressure, and diabetes. It's incredible, but what happens in the womb, it really truly sets the stage for a person's entire life. Okay, so keeping all those risks in mind, we've got to make a really critical distinction. Because, and this is important, not every small baby is actually in trouble. It's so important to separate the babies who are just naturally petite from those whose growth is being actively held back. And this all comes down to two really important terms you need to know. First, there's small for gestational age, or SGA. This is just a measurement, it's a statistic. It means the baby's size is in the bottom 10% on the growth charts. That's it. But the second term, fetal growth restriction, or FGR, that's a medical diagnosis. It means the baby is failing to grow to its full genetic potential, and usually it's because the placenta isn't working properly. Think of it this way. One is a number, the other is a sign of a problem.
And why does this distinction matter so much? Well, take a look at this. Of all the babies that are flagged as SGA, in that bottom 10%, a full 70% of them are perfectly healthy. They're just constitutionally small. The whole game, the entire goal of all this monitoring, is to find that other 30%, the babies who are small because their growth is restricted and they're genuinely at risk.
And just to add one more layer here, even within that at-risk FGR group, we split it into two types. There's early onset, which shows up before 32 weeks and tends to be more severe. And then there's late onset, which is actually more common but can be trickier to spot. This timing really changes how everything is managed. All right, so if we know the risks and who we're looking for, how do we get ahead of the curve? This brings us to prediction and prevention, and this part of the story starts right at the beginning of a pregnancy. So, right from the very first prenatal visit, clinicians are basically on detective duty. They have a checklist. If a pregnant person has just one major risk factor, like being over 40 or having chronic high blood pressure, they're immediately offered extra growth scans. Then there's a list of minor risk factors. If they have 3 or more of those, like being over 35 or having their first baby, they might get offered a special ultrasound to check the blood flow to the placenta. And if someone is flagged as high risk, the good news is there are things we can do. The single most effective tool we have is a low-dose aspirin, started early in pregnancy before 16 weeks. It can make a huge difference. And of course, lifestyle changes are key, especially stopping smoking. Doing that before 15 weeks gives the absolute most benefit. Okay, that's for high-risk folks. But what about everyone else, the low-risk pregnancies, where there aren't any obvious red flags? This takes us to diagnosis. How do you find a problem that might otherwise be completely invisible? Well, for most pregnancies, the first line of defense is, believe it or not, a simple tape measure. It's used to measure the belly, from the pubic bone to the top of the uterus. It's called the symphysis fundal height. It's a decent starting point, but we know it's not super accurate. And this is exactly why ultrasound has become such a game changer. Just look at the difference here. When ultrasounds are only done when there's a specific clinical reason, we only catch about 20% of the small babies. But if you add just one routine ultrasound for everybody in the third trimester, that detection rate jumps all the way to 57%. You nearly triple the chances of finding a baby who might need help. It's a huge deal.
So the second an ultrasound flags a potential issue, a full-blown investigation kicks off. This isn't just one quick look. It involves a super detailed anatomy scan to check the baby from head to toe, those special Doppler studies to look at blood flow, and sometimes screening the mother for any infections that could be affecting things. And this brings us to what is, without a doubt, the most intense part of this entire journey. This is the critical balancing act of monitoring the baby and deciding on the perfect time for delivery. The goal here is simple and it's stark. It's all about preventing stillbirth by spotting any signs of trouble early enough to act. It becomes this constant, delicate dance, weighing the risks of being born too early against the risks of staying in a womb that's no longer a safe place to be. And to walk this tightrope, doctors have some amazing tools. Doppler ultrasound is the star player. It gives them a real-time window into how blood is flowing through the umbilical cord and in the baby's brain. It's like getting a live report on how well the supply line, the placenta, is working. This is often paired with a CTG, which monitors the baby's heart rate for any signs of distress. So all of this high-tech monitoring, all this data, it all boils down to one huge decision. When is the right time to deliver this baby? And this table pretty much sums it up. The timing is tied directly to what the monitoring shows. If it's a mild case and the blood flow looks great, you can wait until close to the due date, around 37 to 39 weeks. But as those Doppler readings get worse, showing that blood flow is struggling or even reversing, the timeline for delivery gets pushed earlier and earlier, sometimes as early as 26 weeks to give the baby the best chance. Now, a lot of people think a growth restriction diagnosis automatically means a C-section, but that's actually not the case. For many of these babies, especially if the situation isn't too severe, inducing labor can be a perfectly safe option. The decision is always tailored to the specific baby and mom. But, the story doesn't just stop the moment the baby is born. For our final section, we're looking beyond birth, because for both the mother and the child, this journey continues. The care plan really extends far beyond the delivery room. For the baby, it means closer follow-up to watch for any potential issues. For the mother, we now know that having a growth-restricted pregnancy is a sign that she herself has a higher risk of heart disease later in life, so she needs good preventive advice. And for any future pregnancies, counseling is absolutely key, often using an analysis of the placenta itself to figure out why it happened and what the chances are of it happening again. And that really brings us full circle. When you think about big societal trends like people having babies later in life or the rise in IVF, both of which can increase these risks, you realize that understanding this stuff is more critical than ever. So I'll leave you with this question. How can this knowledge, this journey we've just walked through, empower the next generation of parents to be better advocates for their own health and for the health of their children?